So we are so excited to welcome back to the show Stefan Padfield. He is Executive Director of the National Center for Public Policy's Research Free Enterprise Project. And Stefan, welcome back.
All right. Yeah, Stefan, YouTube there, but can you hear us?
Yes, and can you hear me?
Absolutely, we can. And now to our audience, we understand this is a little bit ghetto, but since we're on Amtrak time, we're doing it the Amtrak way today. Now, Stefan, you are a constant crusader against wokeness in the corporate sphere, and you've also identified a lot of ways that wokeness is creeping into our government. So tell us what Dell has been up to and what our audience should know about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me back on the show. Great show that you have here. And basically what I wrote about was the fact that Dell has a lot of programs and initiatives that I think are fairly described as woke. And I can go through those. There's about 6 of them I put in the article that I wrote. And what makes them particularly interesting in this time is that it's an issue that basically sets them up to lose government contracts, which they rely on heavily, which could really affect their bottom line. And really all the work that we do is ultimately to promote not just liberty broadly, but also capitalism, free market capitalism, and shareholder value. And this would definitely affect the bottom line and shareholder value. So if you'd like me to, I could quickly just run through what the specific items were that I flagged.
Yes, please do.
All right. So basically what happened was we had some engagement going on with Dell. They asked for something from us. I said, that's great. We'd like something in return. They said they didn't want to give us anything. And so in trying to find something that they might be willing to engage upon and basically do some horse trading, so to speak, to get the company back to neutral and back to winning ways. I found a whole bunch of stuff that just falls very broadly in the sort of woke category. So they've got these net zero greenhouse gas emission commitments, scope 1, 2, and 3. They've got essentially gender and race quotas. So they say by 2030, 50% of our global workforce will be people who identify as women. And you've got to love the fact that they don't say women, they say people who identify as women, right. Which creates a whole other issue. They've got quotas for Black, African-American, Hispanic, Latino. They would say goals. There's a thin line there. They've got resource groups that basically divide employees on the basis of race, like the Black Networking Alliance. And then finally, they've got a 100% score on the Human Rights Campaign's Equal Equality Index, which gets right into transgender ideology and men and women's sports and, 13-year-old girls having, surgery to remove body parts and all that craziness. So each of those independently, I think we could certainly talk about because, there are questions, I think, that come along with, well, what's wrong with that from a lot of people's perspective. But I think just very broadly, they seem to be all in on a very woke agenda, and that puts them at risk, especially with our current administration, of having at least some of their government contracts, which they have quite a few, implicated seriously.
Well, that to me sounds absolutely crazy, and it's even crazier that there are people who would listen and say, well, what's wrong with that? My question, though, is they're a computer company. I don't want my computers made by women just because they're women. I want my computers made by people who know how to make computers and know how to make them effectively and understand security and reliability and all of those things, whether they're women or men or transgender suntanned Eskimos. I want them doing that for their skill as opposed to that. And granted, I'm not a shareholder in Dell, but because I'm an American, I have a stake in the contracts they have. So what is behind this? Because when I think of Dell, I think of Michael Dell. I think of him being an entrepreneur. I think of people who got into this to fight because they loved the PC and wanted to be really successful at it. How did they go so far off track?
Well, first of all, what you identified is just the basic common sense that is going to lead to us ultimately winning these fights, right? Because you're absolutely right. You're a computer company. Your priority should be first and foremost making great computers. And that really should be the first and last priority to a great extent. And there are some companies, you go to their websites, it takes you a while to figure out what they actually do, but you'll know that they're 100% in on ESG and DEI. So it's a real problem. And I think what you're talking about is very important because it goes back to the common sense of just, hey, just make great products. And that's unifying, right? That unifies the employees. You can do that. As to what got them there, it's really a confluence of forces, right? You've got the true believers that have basically, through the long march through the institutions, embedded themselves in these corporations. You've got the opportunists who are basically following the gravy train, right? I mean, under the Biden administration, it was basically subsidies and pats on the back and winks and nod, right? And so the money train was there. You've got the asset managers, you've got the proxy advisors that are creating incentives, monetary incentives for these companies to be all in. You've also got what I'll loosely refer to as the useful idiots, right? They will hear things, or maybe I should say rationally ignorant, right? To be a little less aggressive. Right? They will say things like, well, what's wrong with diversity? Not realizing that what they mean when they say diversity is actual racial discrimination in the name of anti-discrimination. And then finally, you've got the cowards, right? Who may quite properly be afraid to speak up. And it really took all those people to get us to the place where a company like Dell seems to have forgotten that they're just there to make great computers and that actually would be beneficial across the board, and instead gets focused on all this woke stuff.
Well, and let me ask you this. So that is a very, very impressive analysis because I think you break it down very, very well. Where did all of the people who, when you think back to, I guess a good example, even though it was fiction, Bewitched and the guy who ran the company there that Darren worked for and so on, they were very, very devoted to doing a good job, to serving their customers. That's what seemed to matter. And, at the end of the day, what you wanted to do outside, whatever your predilections, if your wife happens to be a witch, you name it, that's something that takes place outside of the office. Where did that enthusiasm for just doing a good job go? Because I see all the people and all the different cohorts that you mentioned, but you would think there would be some people in there who would say, wait a minute, look, we are just here to make computers, get our paychecks, get the company up to the next level and go home. And if you want to do A, B, C, and D, you want to have your racial group, whatever, you do that on your own time, but we're going to do this here. It just seems so odd to me that those people practically seem to no longer exist.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy has a great book out on this, and he makes the point that basically when we had the financial crisis of 2008, essentially the pitchforks came out in Occupy Wall Street, and Wall Street basically struck a bargain to say, look, if we adopt some of your causes, because of course those were primarily leftists in the streets occupying Wall Street, if we adopt some of your causes, will you not string us up on the pitchforks, right? And I'm clearly oversimplifying, but there really is something substantive to this. And in fact, I've heard a lawyer, one of the top lawyers at Wachtell Lipton, which is a very famous law firm that does a lot of defense work for boards, say that their belief is that it's not a choice between defending free market capitalism and making great products and services versus this stakeholder capitalism / communism. Rather, it's you've got to get into stakeholder capitalism and doing all these ESG woke things, or else it is going to go all the way to communism, right? Now, I don't know how much of that is just spin versus actual belief, but there's this idea that they struck a bargain when they felt threatened by people like Hillary Clinton, by Elizabeth Warren, by Occupy Wall Street, and they said to themselves, you know what, let's just paint our, let's do all the greenwashing, let's do all the diversity, all the ESG, all the net zero, and that way they'll give us a pass, and they won't come in and take our salaries and take us over and nationalize us. I think at the end of the day, that's all just at best extremely poor judgment, but it's at least one explanation that I think really does have some legs to it.
All right. If I may, Stefan, we've had a question come in for you, which is a good consumer question from LJ saying, my last 3 laptops were Dells. I'm on a Dell right now. Is Lenovo woke?
I'll tell you what, it's actually pretty easy to go to these websites and figure this out. Now, with the backlash that we've seen, it's gotten a little harder. So you might have to do 3 clicks instead of just 1. But you can just go to a company's website and you can tell pretty quickly how far in they are on this woke stuff, right? So if they are blasting DEI, ESG, net zero, all those sorts of things that we've come familiar with, the whole HRC, 100% score on transgenderism. You're going to see that pretty quickly. And you can even go to HRC's site and see who's getting 100% on their survey and who's paying for them, to do what they do. So that would be, I think, point number one is to go and check out what they're doing. The other thing is we have an app at the National Center, at the Free Enterprise Project, called Proxy Navigator. It's free to download. We want to get the word out. That's why we're doing it. And what you can do there is the companies that we cover, and we cover roughly 150 of the largest companies, we give you direct links to things like ADF's Alliance Defending Freedom's Viewpoint Diversity Score, 1792 Exchange Bias Ratings, right? And so those sorts of things can also help you. And here's another thing I'll say. We have AI now, right? And so a lot of us are afraid of AI. Others are leaning in. I think it's time to lean in. So go to ChatGPT or whatever your favorite large, language model is, and just ask them things like, what are the arguments being made that Lenovo is woke, right? And you will actually get some feedback that way. So it is worth doing your research. It's a lot easier than it used to be, but step one is just going to the website itself. Step two, check out our Proxy Navigator app, and then you can go from there.
That's fantastic. That's great advice.
That is outstanding.
To-dos for the all-American audience. Thank you. Fantastic.
Now, I have to say there was one other good comment here from LJ saying it's pushed from the.
Go to ChatGPT or whatever your favorite large, language model is, and just ask them things like, what are the arguments being made that Lenovo is woke, right? And you will actually get some feedback that way. So it is worth doing your research. It's a lot easier than it used to be, but step one is just going to the website itself. Step two, check out our Proxy Navigator app, and then you can go from there.
That's fantastic. That's great advice.
That is outstanding.
To-dos for the all-American audience. Thank you. Fantastic.
Now, I have to say there was one other good comment here from LJ saying it's pushed from the top down, all the way from the top, BlackRock, State Street, JP Morgan, etc. Larry Fink says they need to, quote, force behavior. They manage 13 trillion in assets. So, Stefan, what do you say to all of the discussion about the large asset managers and so on being so influential in this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the issues that we deal with regularly at the Free Enterprise Project is we will file these shareholder proposals and we will not get a lot of support. And then the left will turn around and say, see, shareholders don't want what you're selling, right? It's a little easier for us to push back now because they're also not winning on any of their shareholder proposals. And I've even got an op-ed out right now that says 90% of shareholders reject DEI because that's how badly they're losing their pro-DEI proposals. But the bottom line is part of the reason we get such low vote counts is because the big five, the big three asset managers, State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, and the big two proxy advisors, Glass Lewis and ISS, are all in on ESG and DEI. And if for no other reason than purely financial, right? So the proxy advisors, they make money selling consulting services that push ESG and DEI. The asset managers make money on their funds that they slap the ESG label on because they were getting hammered by the index funds. You can't make a lot of money if everybody's just putting in to the S&P 500 index.
Right.
But all of a sudden ESG comes along, which includes DEI and sustainability. And all of a sudden you can sell these funds, jack up the premium 2, 3, 4 fold. So they love it. So there's a real conflict there. And then not to mention just the ideology. I think there's no way you're going to convince me that there aren't real issues of ideological capture in at least some large swaths of these asset managers. And they have such incredible power. They go to these companies and they basically say, we can vote you out of office, so get in step.
Well, Stefan, thank you so much for talking about this. We would love to have you back for a longer segment to talk about how we, as free market capitalists, can go ahead and defeat this. Because the one thing that I have, a lot of things I have confidence in here in America, but one thing I always have confidence in is the belief that no matter what, the free marketplace can defeat any attempt to strangle it. as long as it's not legislated out of existence. So the next time we have you on, we'd love to hear more about your research and talk about that. So tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, thanks so much. That all sounds great. Yeah, check us out at nationalcenter.org, and you can also find me on X at Stefan Padfield.
Well, Stefan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for putting up with our delays. We will see you back here next time on the All American Talk Show.
Thank you.